Do you ever feel the need to explain yourself, to make excuses for yourself? Well, if you need to make excuses for yourself, then you've got more work to do on yourself. Because the explanation, if you are living in truth, there is no need to explain yourself no matter what happens. Explaining yourself meaning trying to give some type of explanation of why you did what you did or what part of your character led to that action. Now that is not to say that issuing apologies is not going to be acceptable and appropriate at certain times, very rarely. You want to be very careful about issuing apologies as well. You don't want to live a life where you have to issue apologies, but if you do something and you'll know what it is, then issuing an apology certainly isn't going to hurt you. But you don't want to make a habit of issuing apologies about every little thing. That's like using the word love about every little thing. I love this and I love that and I love to go here and I love her and I love him and I love that. You lose the grandeur of the word. The word has been created by man to explain something that lies outside of the knowledge of man. And in the case of some words, God, love, truth, you don't want to lose the grandeur of the word. So you don't want to go around making excuses for little stupid things all the time because you feel inadequate. Because then apologies because then that leads to apologies, and then apologizing for yourself becomes a bad habit because you feel inadequate, not because you've done anything. And if you have a certain kind of personality, which some people have a personality that it's just kind of bland. I'm not meaning any of these words as a judgment, but it's just kind of quiet and kind of bland. Then some people have a personality that's just exuberant. The exuberant personality can offend people without meaning to, which means that person has to be extra aware of themselves, not meaning aware of how they are behaving, that too, but aware of the feeling that you've done something because you've been exuberant, like something that has offended someone else. The knowledge and understanding that it is not possible for you to offend another person is very important when you have an exuberant personality. The knowledge that it is impossible to offend another person. If you possess that knowledge, now that does not mean that doesn't mean, number one, that you push people's buttons on purpose. You don't do that. Number two, that you 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 know that just because people are reacting in a certain way, that you have not caused that reaction. See, now the reason that an exuberant personality or someone who likes to be funny they might get stuck in that personality because of the reaction of people. Because people are reacting favorably. See, you can't do that either. Now that one is even more difficult. That one's probably even more difficult when you're exuberant and people think you're funny and they're reacting favorably, and then you believe that that has something to do with anything other than what is happening right then. that it doesn't have anything to do with you or who you are or how you are or what kind of person you are, just because people are clapping for you. Okay, but let's stay on the other side, where it is that life is difficult. Because when people are clapping for you, look, that's pretty easy to deal with, isn't it? Although you have to be self-aware because you can get caught up in that. But what it is that's going to lead most people to the information that we are discussing here is typically going to be that they're having some kind of difficulty in life. So if you have people that are, if you have offended, you believe or feel as though you have offended someone, although it is impossible to do so, there's no problem with making an apology. Even if you actually, in actuality, have not done anything, because it is their programming that has caused them to be offended by whatever you have said. Now the onlooker might say, oh my God, that's totally wrong. That guy did offend her. He did say something totally crass and offend her. Well, you know, I would question that. I would question the possibility of that. However, I would also say if that someone said something that was just so crass and the other person was just so highly offended that the person that made the comment knew that that was going to be the result of the comment. And therefore, it's still wrong. It's still wrong to have made the comment, even though it's not wrong in the same reason that society is telling you that it's wrong. Pushing people's buttons might be fun and entertaining, but it is not helpful. What's funny about that is that pushing people's buttons is a lot like magic. It's like magic. It's as if you could make yourself levitate because you have come into some type of deep understanding of the mind. And so therefore you can make yourself levitate and your friends are like, holy crap, we have never seen that before. Okay, but the question is, how, is that useful? Is it useful beyond the amazement factor? The answer is no. Now don't go starting to try to figure out how much, what you can do with levitation and all the things in the material world. I'm talking psychological. No. Okay. And therefore also is pushing buttons. Pushing people's buttons is like magic because when you can say something to another person and it actually literally causes their behavior to change, their feelings to change, I mean, is that not magic? They then begin to react in the way that you knew exactly they would react. It's manipulation. That's what manipulation is. Manipulation is magic. So within all of these psychological disorders that people have, it's interesting that they are disorders which have these people totally off balance. Yet, in a way, they're magicians. They're able to control things with their mind, okay, which also am I and are you, except when you have control of your mind and you realize it, it's totally different. Now look at that. Control of your mind and realize it, control of your mind and don't realize it. In both scenarios, you have control. How about that? In the scenario where you don't realize it, you still have control. Okay? So the change, and now we're not talking the kind of control, we're not talking the kind of white knuckling control here, but control. Meaning that this thing is actually within your possession. Say as if you had a trained bird. A trained bird which can fly, it's totally free. Completely free. You don't have it chained, it's trained. Hey, there's a good one. Trained, not chained. That's a good article title and subject. So the bird is not chained to anything, yet you have complete and total control of the bird. The bird does everything you've trained it to do. And that's how your mind is. Okay, and the person controlling the bird, if they had a bad day or a bad series of days and they forgot about the bird because they were having to deal with their life, they would forget that they have control of the bird. Because there is no interaction within the control at this time. The bird is just chilling out and you are preoccupied. You don't realize you've got control of the bird. So it's interesting in a certain way when you look at that, are those the same state of being? It's not the same state of being, is it? It's the same understanding, and it's the same potential is there. However, in one scenario, there is an active engagement between you and your mind, and in the other one, there is not. And it is through the active engagement which makes it possible to, in the hierarchy of control, I hate to say it that way, but that's the only way that we're going to be able to understand it. In the hierarchy of control, whatever the third dimensional you is above your mind. Okay? Whatever the you is that we're getting at when we're looking at that subject matter is above the mind in the hierarchy of control. The mind is no longer above the self or whatever. Man, we cannot be saying those words. They're not correct. But what the self points to. It's impossible to have a normal conversation when you think this way. Because you have to keep stopping at these little side streets and going down them like 100 yards, and then you're like, all right, I got it, back up, go back to the normal road. All right. So in the hierarchy of control, you now realize that your mind is it's just like your pet at home. That it does what you want. You don't have to put the leash on it unless you want to. But if you do, you can. If you need to go out and take a walk, you can. And it is only this understanding which leads to the ability to rise above your problems. Okay, so that's why you don't need to address your specific problems unless they're currently life-threatening. You don't need to address those. You need to address what we're talking about here, so that then those all can have an underlayment of solidity. Does that sound ridiculous? So we can actually have a life where there's things going on, where you've got things going on that aren't working for you, and instead of changing, going about and spending your time and spinning your wheels, changing things, you can actually slide a solid foundation underneath those things. And then those things will either improve or they'll go away naturally. It won't be the psychological tug of war any longer. So, and it is the psychological tug of war which causes you to feel the need to explain yourself and to apologize for yourself because okay, it's the knowledge of where you're coming from, or what your core is, meaning whether you are either trying to help the world or hurt the world, take from the world. You either want to give to the world or take from the world, or just be totally neutral. Well, those are different sort of places that everybody rolls through, each of those places. But if you're in the place where you take advantage of, now that's what's funny. People that take advantage of other people, they never explain themselves and they never apologize. Isn't that funny? The person who takes from another so that they can be complete never apologizes. But the person who tries not to do that, when they do it occasionally because of circumstance, they're eat up with guilt. Isn't that weird? So in one way, you've got somebody who is a complete loser and has absolutely no awareness of it at all. Either that or they've got total awareness of it and they just don't care. Now that would be a narcissist. But we're not going there either. Now that person certainly never feels the need to make excuses for themselves or apologize for themselves, even when they certainly should. Okay? Now, if you are that kind of person, if you're that kind of person, you're probably not going to even be listening to any of this stuff that we're talking about. And if you are, then there's no reason for me to say I think you should look at that because you already are. So, but okay, and I hate to say it this way, if you're listening, you're not really my target audience at this particular moment. My target audience is the person who occasionally does something that they might feel the need to apologize or explain themselves for, but did not mean to do it, or it was not intentional whatsoever. It was just being driven by whatever psychological imbalance that they were having at that time. Okay? Okay, in order to not cause the imbalance to be worse, resist the action of constantly explaining and constantly apologizing for yourself. Just as a habit, resist it. What I'm saying is use a reverse habit. Resist that. Question, did you do something wrong? Did you do something intentional? Did you do something that actually did hurt someone? If the answer is yes, I did it, whether it's intentional or not, and you feel the need to apologize, then go ahead and do that. The further need to explain yourself, resist that completely. Resist that completely. The apology was necessary because you've done something in the material world that might need a correction. The explanation of who you are and what you are is absolutely unnecessary. Now, if you and this person are wanting to have a dialogue about what's going on, that's different. But if it is just an explaining of yourself to try to make yourself or them feel better because of what happened, the apology is all that is necessary. And if it is not, and if that is not acceptable, then that's just how it needs to be. The explanation of you, okay, is not required if you're dealing with someone that accepts you for who you are. And so if you're dealing with the correct person, it is not necessary. The apology is all that's necessary. And you know what will happen? That will roll into a conversation about it, but not into a explaining yourself. It'll roll into a conversation, a learning experience. People that are on the receiving end of something that might seem negative make an awful big mistake. They make all these assumptions about what's going on, and all they do is become irritated and agitated and do not go on and learn the big life lesson that lies within the thing, which there is. When things go south and you can catch them pretty quick, there is a lesson within that time interval. Within the time interval of where it came off the rails and then where something happened in the world and then you caught it and corrected it, there is a life lesson within that time interval. Okay? And the shorter that time interval it can be, which is a direct result of your awareness and, I'm going to use this word, enlightenment. The shorter that time interval will be. Okay? And what's interesting is what will happen is as that time interval becomes shorter from when something goes off the rails to when you catch it, that time interval in between will have a lesson which is compressed. It will become concentrated. So as you do this thing, your lesson becomes more concentrated and more concentrated. So it's easier to get. You can get it like that, and that therefore you can make fundamental change immediately. This is the process of fundamental change now. The process of fundamental change now is compressing the amount of linear time between when your psychological disorder begins to when you catch it. Okay? And you notice if something is going out of balance, the sooner that you catch it, if you watch that interval, there's an interval at which if you catch it very late, lots of action, lots of motion, lots of activity within the reaching out to grab it before it hits and breaks, before it hits the ground and crashes. Okay, but the less off balance this object is, the easier it is to set it back on balance. And if you'll notice, there is an interval. If you look at that exact thing, a big tall vase made of very fragile glass, but it's very top heavy. And it's like one of those weeble wobbles, and it's falling to the ground, but you're catching it. The time interval as you catch it sooner and sooner and sooner, now just look at that. Look, there is a point at which you don't have to touch it. Do you see that? There is a point at which, as if you go backwards in that time interval, that you go from touching it to not touching it. There is a time, there is right there. Do you see it? That interval, if you can notch the videotape back one frame at a time, and you can get to the interval where you go back one notch from touching the vase, because because its imbalance is so small, you just had to physically touch it. One frame earlier, you're not touching it. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Look at that. Okay? Look at that. If you, at this moment, are not touching it, yet there has been some type of action which has caused you to reach out towards it, but you haven't touched it yet. Okay? It's not off balance. It never was. It never was. You never needed to reach out to catch it. Okay, do you see that? I'm not saying that one frame forward you didn't. I'm saying one frame backward you didn't. I'm not saying it was never a need. I'm not saying you didn't need to reach out and catch it when you got out of balance, when you were psychologically out of balance. I'm not saying you don't need to reach out and catch it, because that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing, is we're reaching out and catching it before it hits the ground. But the objective of what we're doing is to catch it sooner. We don't want to wait until death, until our deathbed, to have all of these realizations and understandings. We want to have them now. We don't want to have them tomorrow, because tomorrow does not arrive. Tomorrow is already here, people. So we've got to get them now, which means we've got to get that time interval all the way back to the point at which we don't have to do anything. See the point? All the work that we are doing now is in order to decrease that time interval from when something goes off balance to when you catch it, to go backwards in that process to the point that you never go off balance again. Do you hear that? That's big talk. That is big talk. That sounds impossible, but it is not. So just look at that and ask yourself, is that possible? Is it possible to do that? And then that space right there, that's the space where you answer the question, but you don't answer the question with a yes or a no. This is a mistake. You've been taught incorrectly that the answer to a question is a yes or a no. The answer to a question is looking into the question. The answer of yes and no is highly irrelevant. And that's not only irrelevant now, it's irrelevant no matter what point in time you are. No matter how long you've looked into this question, the answer of yes or no is always irrelevant. You never get to where that is important. That point never arrives. Why? Because if the question is stupid and doesn't lead anywhere, then you just drop it. It's gone. So therefore, you don't have to say no. It's just gone. But if you look into it and the answer to the question is yes, you don't say yes. You see it. You see the truth. You don't have to answer it then either, because then it's like going outside and looking at the sky. The sky is blue. You don't have to announce it. You don't feel surprised by it. You knew it all along. It's just that now you've opened your eyes. So ask yourself that question. Is it possible for you to go from being so out of order to being so balanced that no matter what happens, you just do not, it's not that you don't explain yourself or make excuses for yourself out of habit any longer. It's because you know who you are. You know. You do not have the feeling of inadequacy that leads to the need to explain yourself. And you don't live in such a way where you cause issues in the world that require an explanation of yourself. When you do, you make an apology for the action, not for who you are. So let's correct that imbalance before it ever happens, so that we don't need to make apologies for who we are, because it is a vicious circle. Because once you've done one, it leads right back to the other. Let's step out of the circle of violence. What we have to understand is that the circle of violence that I'm explaining here is the same thing that gets projected out into the world and then creates actual violence within humanity, actual violence, which leads to bloodshed and death. So it is a serious subject matter when we are talking about it psychologically, because if we don't do something psychologically, it gets projected into the world and then becomes what it is that we see on the news. And although I think the ceasing of the watching of the news, which is what I've done, is a perfectly acceptable answer, I think it sucks to have to do that. I think it sucks that that is information that I'm having to avoid. I know it's there. I know it's there. I recently got back on Facebook. I've only been on it for like a week. Late last night or the night before, I'm on there and I see that someone I knew 20 years ago, their daughter had a motorcycle accident and died that night. I feel, well, no, I'm not going to say I feel terrible. I have, that is something that affects me deeply. However, that's also the reason which I have been off of all of that social networking, is because I don't want to see that. I don't want to see those things, because while we think that we're relating back to some pain that someone else is having and that is somehow helpful, it is not. It's killing the world. Relating to pain is killing the world. Because relating to pain leads to more violence and more pain. Psychological pain leads to projected external pain, which leads to actual pain, death, which then leads back to more psychological pain, because you are relating to the pain and you're seeing it, and you're doing this purposefully. See, I intentionally don't look at things like that, but this just came right across the screen of my phone. I'm just reading little posts that are all of these stupid, silly posts, and then there's one like that. Written by a father who has just found out that he has lost his daughter, who I guess is like 20-something. You know, probably the worst thing in the world ever that has happened to this person ever. And, you know, what is my point? My point is that you have to be intentional about addressing your psychological disorder. And if that means that you don't look into the world, you don't just intentionally look into the world in order to relate to the pain of others. You can help people in pain without relating to their pain. And the way that you do that is you have to address your own pain, your own suffering, your own internal violence. Once you've addressed that, you can then look into the world and be assisting of others without being identifying of them. You don't want to identify with all this stuff. It's killing the people that it's happening to, and then when you identify with it, it's killing you. So you want to assist without identifying with it. You want to be the beacon of light to these people. Okay? Here's what you want. You want for them to identify with you, because you are a strong person. So you can resist the identification with them. But they are in a weakened state. So you want to be the pure light which they can identify with and say, man, I want to go over there. So what I'm saying is you're either going in one direction. You're going in their direction, or they're coming in your direction. So you need to work on your light. Okay? At the lighthouse, the boats are coming towards the lighthouse. Okay? If the lighthouse focuses on the boats and not on the light itself, and not on its own light, see, when the light in the lighthouse goes out, there's no one home to fix it because the lighthouse is paying attention to the boats. But there's no reason to pay attention to the boats that are coming towards the lighthouse as long as the light is working. So therefore, your entire focus is on the light. You do not look at the boat. If the boat runs into the shore and the light is on, then the guy driving the boat out there was not doing something properly. Not you. But if the boat runs into the shore because that light ain't on, that is your complete and total responsibility. So what I'm saying is, stop worrying about everybody else's boat and start worrying about your light.